In this following tutorial, I am going to cover Hammer Level Editor interface and overview of the tools inside the editor. I want you to be very comfortable at the end of this tutorial to go inside, launch Hammer, and be able to navigate and know all the tools and what they do, and just kind of have a general overview and be very comfortable and ready to use Hammer Editor. So at the end of this tutorial, you will be ready to begin creating your own custom maps. So let's begin. The first thing when you launch the editor is you are presented with this interface. Right now we don't have any new maps or an existing map open, so many of these functions are grayed out. So let's go ahead and go up to File and click New. And what you get is a black perspective viewport. Sometimes you have 4 viewports, 3 orthographic and 1 perspective. It's very helpful to have all 4 views on screen at the same time. So to do that, go up to View and click on Auto Size 4 views. You can also click Ctrl A. This will give you top, side, front and a perspective viewport all at the same time. Before we jump in and cover some of these functions of the tools, let's go up to Options and take a look at what we can modify there first. So go up to Tools and all the way in the bottom click on Options. Here you can configure Hammer. So first, game configurations, I would leave this alone for now until you're more comfortable with the editor. I'm going to click over to General, and here by default you have autosave enabled. I like to turn this off because I like to save my maps manually. For undo levels, the default is 50. This should be good enough. Over on 2D views, you have quite a few options here as well. Most of these will make more sense when you begin to create levels, but at this point I would leave this alone. Over into 3D views, you have Performance tab, which is very helpful, and I like to turn my model render distance to a little higher value. I think the default is about 400, and I like to turn this up a little higher. This will render the models inside the perspective viewport within a certain distance without giving you a bound in yellow box. And I'll show you this as an example when we view one of the example maps that Valve provides. And materials and build programs, these are more of executable game configurations that compile and launch your custom map. So I would leave these alone until you become more advanced in creating custom maps. So let's go ahead and click OK. So here we have our 4 views, and in the perspective viewport it's completely black. That means we have nothing created in the map. This is complete void of your world. So to have something inside a viewport, I'm going to create a simple flat box. So don't worry exactly how I'm creating this. I'll cover this in more detail in a later tutorial. Right now I just want to get something going so we can see something in the perspective viewport. So here we have just a flat plane. It's a BSP brush. Majority of the environment, the shell of the environment, is going to be created using the BSP brushes inside Hammer, and then you will add models and texture your environment. But BSP geometry will be the foundation of your map. So now that we have something inside the perspective viewport, let's cover some of the options of how you can view your perspective viewport. So under camera, if you left click, you can change the perspective viewport to any of the 2D orthographic viewports you see here, or you can change to a wireframe, flat, textured and other shader views. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on wireframe. This will run the perspective viewport in wireframe mode. We can go to flat, textured, shaded texture polygons, light map grid, this is used for lighting, and smooth. I tend to keep the perspective viewport in shaded texture polygon until I need to do some light grid setups or go through a wireframe mode, but majority of the time I spend creating the map is in 3 shaded texture polygon mode. So in order for you to navigate inside the perspective viewport, hover over in the perspective viewport first, and if you click Z key, this will put you in the mouse look mode. So if you use the ASDW keys, you can move around back and forth. using the A and the D to go left and right to strafe. And then if you use W and S, you go back and forward, and you can use your mouse to look around. And if you click Z again, this will put you back and give you your mouse so you can select any of the tools. So this is a really quick and intuitive way to move around in the viewport. Z key, move around, and click the Z key again to exit. To maximize a viewport, hit Shift Z inside the viewport that you want to maximize, and Shift Z to exit back inside to see your 4 views. To move around in any orthographic viewports, let's maximize it. So I'm going to left click select that viewport, Shift Z to maximize it, and then if I hold down the spacebar key and hold it down, left click, hold, drag, and I can move around, pan up and down, and with the mouse wheel I can go zoom in and zoom out, and Shift Z to exit. Sometimes when you are moving around between viewports, you press Shift Z and you just can't get back to the 4 views. So to fix that, you can just go back up to auto size 4 views or Control A, and it will give you 4 viewports again. Next very important thing in Hammer or any other level editor that you want to know about is staying on the grid and using the grid setting snaps on at all times. So here on the very bottom, this will tell you that right now currently the snaps are on and the grid is set to 64 units. In order for us to change the grid size, you can use the bracket keys and change the grid setting to a lower value. So when you are creating your BSP geometry, this will make sure that when you move or duplicate brushes, that they are being snapped onto the grid. So this will be a very common function when you are creating your BSP brushes, to use the bracket keys to go up and down in grid size to make sure that your brushes snap to each other. You can also go up to map and make sure that snap to grid is checked on. Here on the left hand side you will find the most commonly used tools that you'll be constantly going to when creating your map. The first one is the selection tool. This will allow you to select any object, any BSP brushes, any entities inside the map. The next one is the entity tool. Entity tool allows you to place lights, player starts, models. So by clicking on the entity tool, you have it enabled, and on the right hand side here under categories you can see that it's defined by entities, and objects is the type of entity that you want to place inside your map. There are a lot of different entities that are specifically used for Counter-Strike Global Offensive map. So for example, you have your player starts, you have your hostage entities, you have your various props. So for this example, I'm just going to insert info player counter-terrorist. So by simply selecting it, left clicking, and then using the select tool, I can select any of these entities, including brushes. Again, I'll cover exactly what you need to place inside your maps when we begin creating a playable map. Most of the environments inside Hammer are BSP based. This means that the geometry created is using simple brushes, such as this floor that I created earlier. So in order for you to create BSP brushes, you'll be using a lot of the block tool. To create your BSP geometry, you have to create them inside the orthographic viewports. So by enabling the block tool, you draw your brushes inside the orthographic viewport and then finalizing them in order to see it inside the perspective as textured objects. The next commonly used tools are texture and decals. So when you are applying textures and texturing your environment, you'll be using a lot of the face edit sheet. This will allow you to manipulate the texture to texture scale. You can replace the texture, you can browse for other textures that are given to you inside Counter-Strike Global Offensive. You can also create displacements, which is terrain inside Hammer. You can also access the browse tool by going on the right hand side under texture groups and clicking browse. This will give you the same texture browsing capabilities that you saw here. So there are multiple ways of accessing the texture browser. You can also go under tools and texture application, open that back up. Then we can also use these two for applying texture and overlays, which I'll cover what they are in a later tutorial, as well as how to manipulate BSP brushes and modify their shape. Now I'm going to open up one of the example files that comes with Counter-Strike Global Offensive. I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to go inside Instances, Office, and load up Counter-Strike Office main. We're going to take a look at how the maps are constructed inside Hammer and cover some more functionality and getting more used to the interface inside Hammer. So the next thing I want to cover is Visgroups. Inside Hammer, Visgroups are ways to organize your scene. So user created is what you create on your own. Think of these as folders. This will allow you to put certain geometry, certain entities in their own groups and then toggle them on and off. Hammer also creates Visgroups automatically. We can go through and just turn off some of these entities and just clear up the scene so we can see better. So Visgroups are very useful at organizing your scene. So the environment in Hammer is constructed using brushes and entities. These entities, again, are either gameplay functionality or there are various props like this tree. So by double clicking on any entities, we can access its object properties. So here we access environment cube map, which is used for reflections. We can click over to the tree, which is a prop static, and by double clicking we can go inside its object properties and we can take a look at it. We have more options. Here on the world model we define what model is going to render, and we can also browse to see what kind of models are available to us. In order for you to select objects, you can simply left click to select brushes, entities, and if you want to deselect them, you either select something else or hit escape to deselect it. If you want to delete something, just simply select it and hit delete. This goes for entities as well. As you can see, the interface of Hammer is not very complex. You have your left toolbar, which will be used most of the time to create your environment, to place your entities, to create brushes, to apply textures, to apply decals, to modify any of the BSP brushes, or to simply select your objects. So what I would recommend for you to open up one of the example files by going under File and open any of the map files that you find inside Instances folder and inside each individual map folder. So for example, you can open up the Inferno main, Aztec main, or you can open up the map we just took a look at. And once you have it opened, just go ahead and navigate around the map using the Z key, maximizing the viewport, clicking on properties, clicking on brushes, clicking on entities, and just get very comfortable with just flying around and switching from viewport to viewport and taking a look at how the environment was constructed. This will get you very comfortable navigating and using the interface of Hammer before we begin creating our own custom map.